Hello everyone, welcome back to Castle Goring, chatting with Lady C. Hello Georgie, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you,
Yes.
Leo. And how are you?
I'm great, thank you very much.
And Mickey, as you can see, is
Yes.
very well too. Mickey
Yes,
wants to be
she's
a part of the show.
Great, great. Oh, Mickey, come here. Good.
Okay, Mick, settle down, hun.
So Mickey, settle down now. We can start with the first question, yes?
Yes,
Mickey.
yes.
So the first question was, what do you think about the trial on the court between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard?
Very, very touchy subject. Because, of course, the fact of the matter is that it's sub judice at the moment, meaning that the trial is taking place and we're really not supposed to speak about it in any depth. But since we have no knowledge of the inner workings of the trial, I think it's perfectly okay for us to touch upon it. Well, I would have to say, of what I've read in the newspapers so far, I just don't see Amber Heard being a very credible witness. Her claims do not stack up, and Johnny Depp's do. That's going off the evidence. If I'm putting myself in the position of the judge, I would find it very difficult to find in favour of the newspaper. I know Dan Wooten, who's the editor, and I like him. And I think it's unfortunate that the trial has taken place at all. But Johnny Depp's conduct has the ring of truth. Amber Heard's conduct has the ring of me, and me again, I think. So she comes across as a real operator and a self-promoter and a drama queen and somebody who is using the system for her self-aggrandizement. I think others spring to mind as well. But it seems to be maybe something in the water with a certain type of person from a certain sort of situation. I think one of the really rather disturbing things to have emerged from the Johnny Depp Amber Heard libel trial is how certain members of the sisterhood feel that if a woman says something, it is true, and if a man says it, it's a lie. And that, you have members of the sisterhood jumping on the bandwagon, showing solidarity, when really everybody's solidarity should not be to the sisterhood, or if you're a man, the brotherhood, or any other hood. It's supposed to be to the truth and to decency and to good, sound, solid judgment and proper behaviour. And yeah, Johnny Depp is coming across as really a very honest, straightforward and decent guy. Yeah, he has a drinking problem. Yeah, he has a drug problem. I have to tell you, having been married to an alcoholic and having spent years in Al-Anon and AA as a result of my marriage, there are very nice, sweet, kind drunks and drug takers and drug abusers, and there are violent. I had a friend who was an expert in alcoholism at the Maudsley Hospital. And she once said to me, she said, because we were speaking about my experiences maritally. And she said, you make a big mistake in thinking that Colin beat you up because he was drunk. She said he drank to give himself permission to beat you up. She said, that is the nature of a wife beater. And not all alcoholics are wife beaters or husband beaters, whatever the case may be. You know, there are violent alcoholics and there are non-violent alcoholics. There are violent drug takers and non-violent drug takers. And what has impressed me with the evidence that Johnny Depp gave was that he positively expressed his anger. Rather than hit a woman, his evidence is that he would hit the cupboard door or hit whatever he hit. So he wasn't denying that he got angry. And I have to tell you, I also know what it's like to be wound up by alcoholics. My mother was also an alcoholic. And Colin Campbell and my mother had an absolute gift for pressing your buttons and winding you up and making you lose your temper. But I would never dream of hitting anybody. And his evidence is that he didn't either. And I'm really disturbed by some of the sisterhood. I gather that Cherie Blair, actually, I think in fact, she's called Cherie Booth QC, because that's how she signed the visitor's book at Balmoral, which was rather a bit of a joke. I mean, can you imagine signing your Queen's Counsel in the house of the Queen? I mean, talk about pretentious. But I gather that she's jumped on the bandwagon. It may not be true, and if it's not true, I immediately withdraw the statement, but it's certainly been published that she has jumped on the bandwagon to show solidarity. No, 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 no. I'm sorry. I think it's just not on. The fact that she is a woman doesn't mean that she is a victim. And the world is full of liars and cheats and self-aggrandizing phonies who claim victimhood when there is no cause for it. And I think it's quite obvious by these comments where my sympathies lie.
Okay, let's stick to Hollywood. So what do you think about Kanye West running for the US president and Kim Kardashian threatening him to divorce him because of that?
Well, you know, life is never predictable with the Kardashians. I have grave reservations for anybody, any family whose very lifeblood is constant attention, attention, attention. Having said that, I think the Kardashians are very good at what they do. Mm-hmm. You know, the fact that they're rather tacky and it's already rather vulgar and trésarriviste doesn't alter the fact that they are extremely successful at what they do. And they do what they do very well. I know I've never met Kanye West or Kim Kardashian or indeed any of the Kardashians. It's not my world, and I don't think it's a world I would like to be a part of, quite frankly. But putting that aside, I think it's always rather distressing to see somebody who's mentally ill melting down in public. But having said that as well, you know, the reason why the Kardashians and the Kanye Wests and the Meghan Markles of this world are so successful is that they have absolute self-belief. I gather Kanye West has talent as a musician. It's not a field I know anything about. I have all my knowledge with regard to music is basically classical. I know a little bit about, you know, the Bee Gees and Gladys Knight, and I also do know a certain amount about proper 20th century classicists who were not classical, people like Cole Porter, Jerome Kern. But really, my knowledge is in classical music, so I could never comment one way or the other on Kanye West's talent, but I gather he's talented. And I think it's always regrettable to see anybody, talented or talentless, melting down in public. But there is a link between a certain form of mental illness and being a very successful actor, actress, performer. Because a lot of these people have a tremendous amount of self-belief that is beyond what I would regard as healthy. And I think most psychiatrists and psychologists would agree with me that it would be an unhealthy degree of self-confidence and self-involvement. But that's what helps to make them the great successes that they are. Maybe if Kanye West had not got in, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speculate. It's not fair on Kim Kardashian. It's very difficult to be married to somebody who is mentally ill. I speak from experience on the subject. And it's always very unattractive when they have a meltdown in public. So I have a degree of compassion for them. But it also shows the caliber of person who regards it as acceptable to put himself or herself forward to be President of the United States of America. I mean, whatever happened to the good old days when politicians and leaders were supposed to be people of merit and note and people who actually understood something about governance? I mean, it's beyond a joke, because the President of America is one of the most important positions on earth. And are we seriously proposing that the world has reached a stage where talented or talentless, every half-baked, over-ambitious nutcase who decides that he wants the top job is going to run for the presidency and, God forbid, be elected to it? I mean, the whole thing is, I despair for America. I really do. I love America. I went to school in America partly. I spent the first 7 years of my adult life in America. It's a wonderful country. It's made a wonderful contribution to civilization. I just despair for what's going on in America now. I mean, I think it's really sad. And I link that with Kanye West, that somebody like him can actually put himself forward for the presidency of America. And I suppose people have sort of lost track of the fact that the media and the entertainment world is entertainment. It's not really the real world. And, just because somebody is televisual or has a personality that is fetching in the public domain doesn't mean that he or she has the ability to govern. I mean, really, I'm beginning to think that that the most effective way of electing leaders is that they're never shown, so people don't decide that they're ugly. Many ugly leaders have been great leaders. Many good-looking leaders have not been such great leaders. And I think there's far too much emphasis placed now on personal presentation. It should be about the person's ability to govern and what the contribution is that they are going to make to the country's welfare, the people's well-being, and ultimately, if you're President of America, the rest of the world. So.
Yes. even Paris Hilton said that she will maybe run for the presidency.
Did she?
Yes.
Did she?
Yes.
Really?
But this is second time she's like saying this. I think it's just PR trick for
I
her
think
to
it's
get
most
attention.
public relations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
the last time she said if she get elected that she will paint White House into pink. So it will rename to Pink House.
Okay, so she's a joke candidate.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we
Obviously.
used to have Lord Such in England who never ever got any votes, and it was a joke thing, you know. So I suppose if you have people like that, it's fine.
Just need media attention as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, but it also shows to what extent a very important field is being
Yes.
trivialized and encroached upon by the entertainment industry. I also have grave hesitation for many of the actors and actresses and entertainers who, because they're successful, all of a sudden feel that their opinions are worthy of being listened to and that they have merit. Half the time they're meretricious as opposed to having merit. But anyway, next question. Let's go to something a little bit more interesting.
Yes. So we are still sticking to Hollywood, but we are flying to your Jamaica. So did you ever knew or met Errol Flynn because he had a plantation in Jamaica?
Yes, well, in fact, Errol Flynn, no. Errol Flynn died when I was, I suppose, about 8 or 9 or 10. I don't remember exactly. But I mean, he died when I was young. I knew his wife, Patrice Wymore, slightly. And I knew his daughter, Arnella, who was his daughter with Patrice, rather well. Because we were all in the same group together. We were all the similar age, and we went to each other's parties. And
they lived near you in Jamaica?
No, they had a plantation in Port Antonio. And we lived in Kingston. Well, actually not Kingston, St. Ange, but everybody calls it Kingston. So no, we didn't, but we were all members of the same group and went to each other's parties. And Arnella in 1973, I remember, was living in England. She lived on the corner of St. George's Square and the Embankment. And she was a really nice girl, but she was very druggy. And she died of drugs, which was very sad. And also I was friendly with Sid Ferguson, whose mother Dawn Calder, who was a very grand white Jamaican, after Patrice's marriage to Errol hit the rocks, he had an affair and wanted to marry Dawn. And because I was friendly with her daughter, she told me all. And she was very funny about Errol Flynn. And of course, her mother was hardly thrilled that a girl from such a wonderful background was taking up with a roue of a movie star. But I think finally her mother put the kibosh on the relationship. Dawn would have been about, I suppose, 17 at the time, and Errol Flynn would have been in his late 40s, I would imagine. He liked nubile young ladies, and in those days there was nothing wrong with a 40-something-year-old man liking a 17-year-old girl because, of course, debutantes came out at 18, but some came out at 17. And some girls from good families got married as young as even 15 and 16, sometimes 14. And I mean, it's all changed now, but that's what happened in those days. But no, I never met Errol Flynn. He died, I was a child, and he died before I had a chance to, join the social world, so to speak.
Yes. So we will stay in Jamaica a bit more, as there was
Uh,
many famous person there,
yes.
and you probably maybe met Howard Coward.
Noël Coward. Noël, you know, like God, the
Noël.
Happy
Yeah.
Noël.
Okay. Wait.
I never ever met Noël Coward. Oh, he died in 1973, if I remember correctly. Which was by which time I was living in New York. But I never crossed paths with him. But I have been to his house. Noël Coward was actually a fascinating man because he was a suburban middle-class boy who was taken up by the upper classes in the 20s, at a time when most people didn't make the transition. He was very talented. There's now the Noël Coward Theatre, which has been named after him. He was given a Lifetime Award, a Tony Award. He was knighted shortly before he died. He did exemplary war work, and in fact, King George VI wanted to knight him. But because he was gay, Churchill did not want him knighted and used the excuse that he had contravened currency regulations in 1941. Anyway, in the 30s and 40s, he was in the 20s especially, late 20s and 30s into the 40s, he was an absolutely huge star. He not only was a songwriter, he was a playwright. He performed in his plays. He had a very crystalline public image because he was the very first person to wear a dressing gown on stage with very decorous slippers and with his long cigarette holder. And he became a huge star. Fast forward, his war work was exemplary. Not only did he use his writing talents to really undermine the Nazi regime, but he also wrote the screenplay for In Which We Serve, which was a movie that was basically propaganda about the sinking of the HMS Kelly, which was Lord Mountbatten's ship. He was a great friend of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who in fact, after his death, unveiled a plaque to him, if I remember correctly. And when she was asked why she'd done it, she said, because he was my friend. And indeed, they were friends, because when she was in Jamaica, she used to go and visit him at Firefly, which was his house in Jamaica, in Port Maria, and where he died. I think he was buried 3 days after his death in Jamaica. He died pretty young. He died at, I think, about 74, which was, for now, very young. But I remember Noël Coward being a pretty old man. Admittedly, I was very young, and young people always think older people are ancient. But he was physically very old for his age. He had arterial sclerosis, that I know. He died of heart failure. He had spent his whole life smoking. He drank. He didn't exercise. So in terms of what we would regard as taking care of himself, he did not, which was very typical of his generation, it's got to be said. He also had a partner, lifetime partner, called Graham Payne, who, when he died, edited his diaries, which were a huge success. But I'm afraid I didn't know him. Nevertheless, it's really a very unprepossessing little bungalow, but it has the most beautiful setting that you could possibly imagine. It's on a bluff overlooking an islet in Port Maria. It is so beautiful you cannot imagine. He purposely built a small house with, I think, if I remember correctly, it only had one bedroom and a sitting room with 2 grand pianos. He then had about a half a mile down on the coastal road a guest cottage where he used to put up his house guests. He didn't want people staying. And it's a very modest 1950s bungalow, because in the 1950s, people did not have huge holiday homes the way they now do. They had very ordinary, pedestrian, functional holiday. It was the roof over your head, a bed, a drawing room where you could entertain, verandas where you'd entertain. Chris Blackwell, who founded Island Records, he bought, actually, I could be wrong, it could have been Eddie Seaga. I don't remember exactly now, but one of them, either Eddie Seaga or Chris Blackwell. Eddie Seaga was the Prime Minister of Jamaica, and Chris Blackwell is the founder of Island Records. Both of them were born into very well-established upper-class families. And they have great pride. Well, Eddie's now dead, but they Chris has and Eddie had great pride in their national heritage. And they understood how important it was to preserve our history. And this was in the 60s, well, would have been really 70s, more 60s, 70s, 80s, into the 90s, when everybody was mad to tear down beautiful old buildings and erect concrete jungles. And they both decided no. And one of the houses that fell into rack and ruin was Firefly, if I remember correctly. I think that's the name of Noël Coward's property. I could be wrong, because, I mean, we're speaking about 50 years ago. Actually, yeah, about 50. Maybe, no, a bit less, 40 years ago, was when I went and saw it. And in those days, it was really very run down. But I think Eddie's the one who rescued it, and I think then Chris bought it. But I could be wrong there, because what Chris definitely bought was Golden Eye, which, again, was a very modest bungalow holiday home, very near to where we used to spend summers, because we used to spend summers on the adjoining property to Golden Eye. And I remember Stuart the gardener, every time we arrived, he would say, "Now you Pickney, you can't go across that border, because the Englishman don't like Pickney, and him will don't cross it, because you don't know what him going to do, but him going to something terrible." We were completely terrified of crossing into Golden Eye. And there was actually, it was almost like a jungle separating the two properties. And we never went to it. The horrid Englishman, who was going to be so beastly to children that our lives were in mortal danger, according to Stuart, was Ian Fleming, who wrote the Bond books. And this would have been when he was writing the Bond books. He was at the time married to the former Lady Rothermere, and Charterish she had been. and they had a son together who rather tragically committed suicide. The marriage was pretty much over by this stage, and Ian Fleming had a huge step out with Blanche Blackwell, Chris Blackwell's mother, who, she's dead now, she was a distant cousin of mine. And they had a huge step out. So to that extent, my path crossed Ian Fleming's. But again, I never met him because we were absolutely warned to never, and we never did. And it turns out Stuart was absolutely right because he absolutely loathed children. Don't ask me why, but he did.
Oh.
So that's my experience of
Ooh.
the famous playwright and the famous author, one of whom was a neighbour of ours in the summer, and the other of whom I never met.
Oh. So very, very interesting experience of yours.
Well, Jamaica in the 50s and 60s into the 70s, really into the mid-70s, was the premier winter colony on earth, and everybody of consequence used to come to Jamaica, and one ran across them quite often. But of course, when I was a child, it was my parents and my parents' generation who ran across them. If we ran across them, it was because they were on the veranda and we were passing with our nurse, because in those days they were called nurses. You had a nurse, then you had nursemaids. They now say nannies,
Yes.
but in the olden days, and Jamaica was about 50 years behind England, and at the turn of the last century in England, nobody said anything about a nanny. They were your nurse, and then it became nanny, and we took a little while to catch up. But so we would be, with our nanny, or once we got older, with just children were not encouraged to hang around grown-ups. My mother, like many people of her background, thought children should be seen and not heard.
Yes, yes.
And seen meant for the blink of an eyelid.
Yes.
You arrived. I'm sure you were brought up like that.
Yes,
too.
yes. And when my grandfather told me when he was child, he was the youngest, and there was 4 other sisters, so it was 5 of them. So when the guests will arrive, they will need to stand, in the line by how they are tall, and greet the guests, and after disappear.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
they need to go to their rooms or outside.
Yes.
They were not allowed to stay with them.
Well, a child-centric world did not exist in those days. And in fact, child-centrism is a very modern phenomenon, because even in my day, children were not the center of the universe. And it is interesting to see how too much child-centric focus has bred a whole generation of spoilt, entitled, badly behaved narcissists, as well as some very nice, lovely young people. So, and some of the young people have wonderful values. And so I think it's the degree of child centricity that is the issue. Queen Elizabeth I, think at the age of about 4 or 5, spoke ancient Greek, Latin, English, and I don't remember what other languages, fluently. Historically, children were not a different breed. Children were small, growing human beings, and they were expected from they were children to behave the way they would be behaving when they were adults. So the training started very young, and there wasn't that much latitude. I decided when my boys were young that I would have the ancient Chinese attitude, because we had been brought up in some ways quite militaristically. And so I decided that I would bring my children up in the ancient Chinese way, which meant that basically they were allowed to indulge themselves till they were about the age of 7, at which stage they were expected to start to smarten up. But they always had to have good manners. I'm not sure I did the right thing. You know, you know my boys,
Yes.
so you would know whether I did the right thing or not. I will say, when they were at Hill House, one of the teachers once at a parent-teachers meeting said, speaking to me, and I thought someone who was beside me, you know, your children are the best mannered children in this school. And I looked to see who she was speaking to. And she said, no, to
It's
you.
yours.
So they obviously, on some level, were
Yes.
picking up certain things. But believe me, they were also quite naughty and quite wild.
Well, like everyone.
Well, no.
When we were young.
No.
Yes.
No. But anyway, so.
Well, great. Thank you for sharing all of this interesting experience with us. And I hope our viewers will keep following us and writing the questions.
Yes. Thank you so much for your questions. Can we please have some more questions? Anything that interests you, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you very soon. Goodbye.